So good evening, PWCS families, and welcome to the Family Engagement Series. Today's session is overview of free application for federal student aid, FAFSA, and Virginia Alternative Student Aid, which is VASA. My name is Yanette Boyd, and I am the supervisor for Family and Community Engagement. Today's session will be recorded and will be presented in the requested languages of English and Spanish. We will begin interpretation once this slide is reviewed in the requested languages. So if you're on your computer, you're going to look for the interpretation button on your control bar. Once you click on it, you will pick your desired language. Then your icon should change. If you're on your phone, you're going to click on the Join Audio and click Call over Internet. Click on the three dots and more. You're going to click on Language Interpretation and click on the language you want and done. At this time, the Spanish interpreter will review the slide.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Para español en su computadora, busque el globo en la parte inferior, haga clic para activar y escoja el español. El icono cambia a ES, que significa español, haga clic para listo. En su teléfono, haga clic para unirse al audio a través del internet. Haga clic en los tres puntitos, haga clic en interpretación, escoja el español y haga clic para listo. Gracias.
Thank you. At this time, interpretation will begin. I would like to welcome our presenter for this evening. He's no stranger to the Family Engagement Series. I would like to welcome Jason Perrier. He's the director of the College Place in Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Yanette. And I'm going to share my screen. If I can find my presentation. Let's see. The slideshow. So just to begin, my name is Jason Perrier, and like Yanette said, I'm here from the College Place in Alexandria. It's a free resource center that works with students and families as they navigate through the post-secondary journey, providing free guidance and support along the way. Usually the question that I get from mom or dad after I say that is, Jason, how do you do this work for free? Well, ECMC, which is the company that employs me, they contract directly with the Department of Education, servicing student loans. So as a part of that partnership, one of the things they ask companies to do on the front end is to educate the public about paying for post-secondary ed, which is where my job comes in and why it's absolutely free support. You'll never get a charge from me for any guidance or advice you ask for along the way. If you would like your student to receive contact from me, you can scan this QR code on the screen in front of us to get signed up onto my list. And you'll see it at the end of my presentation. But for anyone that signs up between now and December 1st, I'm doing a scholarship drawing. So I know some of the questions had to deal with how do we get scholarships? What do we do? You can sign up for messages from me. And as long as a student responds to at least one of them between now and December 1st, I'll do a drawing in December for two $500 scholarships at that point. Doesn't matter if they're in their senior year yet or not. And the presentation on my end is titled Paying for College. But when I use the word college, I want to add some emphasis there that I'm talking about anything post-secondary. So trade, technical certifications, 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees. When I'm using the word college during this presentation, I'm meaning it to encompass all of those pathways after high school. As you can see here, this is our agenda for this evening. We'll start with level setting and talking about college costs and what they look like as of today. I'll spend the vast majority of my time with you all this evening talking about the types of financial aid and different applications you'll see in this process, especially if your process is focused on the Commonwealth of Virginia. Towards the end, I'll touch on some timeline and action items to consider based upon the time that you find yourself in for either you as the student or your parents for your son or daughter, depending on what year they are in high school. And then I'll wrap up with some additional resources and give you all some takeaways from the presentation to leave with. So from a national standpoint, this is what costs are looking like. And I always encourage students and families when I'm meeting with them not to either add schools onto your list or eliminate them just because of the sticker price that you see advertised online. One, because you could be missing out on a great institution or a great program that is a really great fit for you or your son or daughter. But two, before you work through the process of applying for financial aid, seeing what merit scholarships or honors program opportunities may be out there for your student, you don't know what the financial aid process could look like. But this is just a level set to see what the reality is as of today. Oftentimes when you're hearing from community colleges, they'll plug that their cost of attendance in terms of tuition and fees is lower than anywhere else. And that is absolutely true. But one of the conversations I have with my students and families that are considering starting off at the community college level after high school is to think about the total cost of attendance. So for a community college student that is still living at home, commuting to and from that campus on a daily basis, there are expenses that a community college might not put into a budget that a student may still need to consider as a part of the financial aid process. Parents, if you're still going to house and feed your child, as long as they're making progress towards their degree, that's great. But I also know that the reality for some families is that that is not fiscally something that can be achieved. So once their son or daughter hits 18, they need them contributing financially to the household. This total number on the screen captures that idea. So for students and families planning to go the community college route, have that discussion. Can mom or dad or mom and dad continue housing and feeding you without you contributing towards those expenses? Or is that something that you need to plan for as a part of your budget as a college student? Public colleges and universities have the next highest prices in this conversation between their tuition and fees and their total cost of attendance. And then private colleges and universities have the highest cost of this process. But if you're looking for sources of especially merit scholarships, those private institutions are going to have the most dollars available in this process. So again, I don't want you all to dismiss institutions just because of the sticker price or again, focus on the lowest cost here. We'll work through the financial aid process and see what schools are offering you, and then make the decision on the back end about what is the best fit from a financial standpoint. There are some things you can control in this process and some things that are out of your hands. Part of it depends on whether or not you're in state or out of state. So if you're applying to schools inside of the Commonwealth of Virginia, you'd be considered in state for those public institutions in the Commonwealth. If you're applying to any schools outside of the Commonwealth, you'd be an out of state student. So that will set your tuition and fees rate at that point initially. Sometimes colleges have what's called differentiated tuition between from one major to another. The cost may be different for an engineering student versus a history major versus somebody that's studying foreign affairs and somebody studying business or nursing. So as you're exploring colleges and looking at their cost, don't just look at the sticker price in terms of their advertised cost of attendance. Dig into the major or area of study that your student wants to go into to make sure you're getting the full financial picture of what the cost may be. And because those are set. And there's not really a lot of negotiation that can happen there, especially when it comes to public schools. When you hear other families talk about negotiating tuition rates down, they're usually talking about private schools who have greater flexibility in how both not only their tuition and fees are charged, but what kind of discounting they can do in the financial aid process as well. Food and housing is color coded both ways because it depends on what your living circumstances look like when you start your college career. So some institutions require students to live on campus all 4 years. So then those rates would be set in terms of housing and meals. There are institutions that require students to live on campus their first and or second year of college, and other institutions may be more commuter based, so they may never expect a student to live on campus, and that they could be commuting the entire time during their undergraduate career. So some of those costs can be controlled. Some of them are non-negotiable in this process. And most of what I've already discussed are direct costs that will be billed directly to the student as they've chosen to enroll. And those costs are really out of your hands as a family. The indirect costs are areas where you can control the budget and how much the student is spending in terms of their total cost of attendance. In terms of books and supplies, if you as a family are looking to save money, don't go to any of your campus bookstores. They're going to charge a premium for everything in their sites. Even if there's a discount there, it's usually discounted from a higher rate than you could find online. So if you're looking to save money within your budget from a financial aid standpoint, look for opportunities to purchase books secondhand. So from students who took the course the previous semester, think about and consider renting textbooks. There are digital textbooks that may cost less. And then last but not least, consider looking at your on-campus library to see if there are course textbooks that are held in reserve for the class, meaning that you had to go to the library. You couldn't check those books out, but you could use those resources to keep up with your work in your class without having to pay for those expenses. In terms of personal expenses, this covers everything from your phone bill to your shampoo and every other item that you may need to pack up and either take with you to college if you're a student watching this presentation, or you may be packing for your son or daughter if you're a parent. For parents looking to save money, buying in bulk at the beginning of a semester or beginning of an academic year may cost more upfront in terms of that total price tag, but can help you and your son or daughter save money over the course of an academic year. And then last but certainly not least is transportation. For those students looking to stay at home and maybe go to their local Nova campus in the fall, do you have your own means of transportation now? Or are you utilizing mom or dad's vehicle to get to and from high school? Is that something that will still be manageable when you start school in the fall? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on your individual family circumstances. Do you need to set aside money to save towards a car? So for some students, transportation can be a huge expense, especially going into freshman year if they have to secure their own vehicle. As a family, talk about what makes sense logistically. And from a budgetary standpoint, and make sure you include that in your overall discussion of the cost of attendance, because all of these categories are a part of the cost of attendance and feed into the financial aid process, no matter where you're enrolling to go to college. From there, if you're not sure where to start, the net price calculators that are organized on collegecost.ed.gov is a great site to explore. They pull in all of the net price calculators from it's probably not every single college and university in this country, but it's pretty close now in terms of the websites that have all of these net price calculators on their admissions and financial aid websites. This is required by the U.S. Department of Education now. And the idea for these net price calculators is they're going to give you an estimate of what your financial aid package will look like, factoring out any grants or scholarships that the student may be eligible for. So it'll give you what's called your net price. So a number that you can really plan and budget and strategize for as you're searching for scholarships and considering whether or not you need to borrow money for the student, or if the family's in a position to help with a payment plan for those costs over the course of an academic year. You can use these numbers to help plan what this process may look like as you work through the college application and financial aid process. The only way to find out the actual net price, though, is by completing the process of applying for financial aid. And that's something that we'll touch on in the next section. So in terms of the types of financial aid, depending on your individual family circumstances, you may be working from two of these categories on the screen, or you may be working from all three. For the students watching this presentation, if your parents are in a position where they've been able to set aside some money to help you pay for college, either through a 529 plan or other savings, maybe grandparents have set aside some money for you. One, I want you to tell your parents that you love them and that you appreciate this effort that they've made to save on your behalf. Because the reality is, even though this financial aid process may make some parents feel like they're being asked to pay for their child's education from the federal government's perspective, and from the college's perspective, the cost of the education is the responsibility of you as a student. So you're responsible for figuring out how to make this process work. If your parents are in a position where they've saved some money and they can help you out with that, that's great. But that's not the reality for every student and every family. So what some students may need to lean on is the middle category on the screen here. So present. At present, you can apply for financial aid if you're a senior in high school now. If you're a junior or younger, this is something you won't focus on now. You'll wait until your senior year to start working on that part of the financial aid process. But for younger students, one of the things you can do is start looking for scholarships. Juniors are in a position for some scholarship competitions where they can secure funding their junior year of high school. and utilize that when they get ready to go to college a year and a half from this point. And then younger students, there are some scholarships that are available to sophomores and freshmen in high school, but those are rarer opportunities. So for those younger students, I recommend thinking about the extracurriculars and sports and other activities you're engaging in high school, and mapping out a strategy for how you're going to be involved in those things over the course of the next few years. So by the time you get to your senior year, you have a well-developed resume of activities that you can plug into scholarship search engines, and they can help you identify organizations that are looking to give funding to students like you because you've been involved and engaged in many different ways as you've worked through your high school experience. You may be offered as a student the opportunity to utilize work-study funds to help you pay for your education. That's definitely one way you can pay. And then there's a cash flow option in terms of if the remaining costs that you owe are low enough and manageable that you can use a payment plan or pay by semester to work towards the total cost of attendance. And then last but not least, in terms of the future, you as a student or you as parents may be in a position where you're borrowing money to help the student pay for their education now, and then those funds have to be repaid in the future. From there, when I'm meeting with students and families, everybody wants to hear about gift aid, so grants and scholarships. And in an ideal world, that's all I would have to talk to you about. But especially for those students who are going to four-year colleges and universities, the reality is that you're going to be using a combination of the gift aid, grants and scholarships, and self-help. So loans, work study, part-time job, maybe even parents or you as a student working with payment plans to help you cover your cost of attendance. And I'd be doing you a disservice if I wasn't discussing all of these things in under the topic of paying for college or working through the financial aid process. So I cover all of these topics. When it comes to applying for financial aid, once you work through the free application for federal student aid or the FAFSA, these are the three primary grants that we see being awarded from the federal government. These are not all the federal grants that are available. There are grants beyond these, depending on students' individual circumstances, what majors, where they're enrolling, that may be made available to students. But for the most part, the three on the screen here are the ones that we primarily see in the financial aid process. The federal Pell Grant is determined by the student aid index or the SAI that a student will receive by submitting their FAFSA and having that processed. That federal Pell Grant maxes out at $73.95, so $7,395, and that Pell follows them wherever they go. So if they go to Nova, Mason, American, Harvard, doesn't matter. That dollar amount for Pell will remain the same across all of those financial aid award letters. The Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSCOG fund, is similar to Pell in that it is a need-based award. But the difference is that these dollars are given directly to colleges and universities to disperse to the students who are enrolling at their institution. And this award ranges from $100 to $4,000. In Virginia, typically the FSCOG will range from 400 to 500 to about 2,000 on the upper end. I haven't seen anybody above that range, even though it is possible to receive higher than that in terms of this funding. This grant was almost zeroed out during congressional appropriations this summer. So this is one of the opportunities where I always encourage students and families to tune in to decisions that politicians are making. Because at the federal level, Congress decides every year what the financial aid process may look like. And I don't care who you vote for. I tell students and parents to tune in just because the decisions that Congress makes can impact what future years in financial aid look like for you and your family. So tune in and see what decisions are being made at the federal level. For the Teach Grant, this funding is for those students who want to become teachers. You'll work with the institution that you enroll in to get access to these funds. Not every college or university in the U.S. participates in this program, so it's select, not few, but it's not every school that participates, and you'll work with the school that you're enrolled in to get access to these funds. Typically, junior, senior year of your undergraduate career, so not for every year at the undergraduate level. And there's a service requirement on the back end if you receive teach grant funding. You have to teach for 4 years in an area of need at a school of need in order to meet that service requirement, and you have 8 years after graduation to do so. If you don't meet that service requirement, that grant becomes an unsubsidized loan with interest from the day the grant was dispersed to the student originally. So just be careful there. If you're utilizing teach grant funding, make sure you fulfill the service requirement on the back end. This is where I usually lose my families in Prince William County when I start talking about Pell Table for both single parent and 2-parent households. But one, please hang in there. I know that especially if you're coming from a 2-parent household and both parents are working full-time jobs, your adjusted gross incomes will probably be outside of the range of being eligible for Pell. But for a single parent household, on the left side of the screen, based on family size, if your AGI is below this range, then you'll qualify for maximum Pell, so the 73.95 that I mentioned earlier. If you're somewhere in between the middle two tables, you'll qualify for partial Pell. And then any AGIs above this range mean that you're not Pell eligible. That does not mean you're not eligible for any financial aid. It's just for this one grant from the federal government, you're not eligible for that funding. And you also had to meet this eligibility requirement, plus have a student aid index lower than 14,790 in order to receive the Pell Grant. That is a new addition for this year, coming out of the appropriations process this summer from Congress. Same concept, 2-parent household. Again, this is where I lose a lot of my families in this conversation. Sometimes moms or dads will ask me, Jason, is it worth our time completing the process of applying for financial aid to be told we're not going to qualify for anything? And my answer is yes, because while you might not get anything in terms of need-based aid from the federal government or from the state government, you have the opportunity to get access to institutional aid, and you'll only have that opportunity if you finish the process of applying for financial aid on the front end. Institutional funds typically require you to apply by a priority deadline that an institution will set. The fun thing about the college admissions and financial aid process is in addition to all the admission deadlines that are out there between early decision, early action, regular decision, sometimes there's early action 1, early action 2. There may be a rolling admission program for the schools that you're looking at. You may have multiple deadlines. On top of that, you also have financial aid deadlines. As equally as important as these admission deadlines, these institutional priority deadlines are typically the deadlines that you have to submit these financial aid forms by in order to get access to institutional funds. I use the example of when I used to work in undergraduate admissions at UVA. One of the things we did after we had completed our review for admitting students into the incoming class, we also reviewed for merit scholarships. And one of the largest scholarships we reviewed for during that time frame was a 4-year full tuition scholarship. And if a student didn't have their FAFSA or CSS profile on file by the time we made those awards, in reality, we may have been in a position to be able to give them 48 to 72 hours to clear that up. But from a practical standpoint, it is almost impossible for if one of those 2 forms has not been filed to get through that process quickly enough. So if you haven't filed your FAFSA or if you didn't complete the CSS profile, this is one of the opportunities you can miss as a family. So I always encourage everybody that I'm talking to about this process, file your FAFSA if you're required to file the CSS profile under the institutional form to get access to institutional aid. Please do that by the priority deadline to make sure you unlock any merit scholarships the student may be eligible for in this process. These funds are offered to incoming and current students. And you want to make sure you check the financial aid website for every college university that the student is applying to make sure you're not missing any additional required documentation they're asking you to submit in this process. Check the email that you use to apply. And this is for students and for parents. Ask your son or daughter to check their email regularly because there may be updates or the college will reach out to them directly by email if they're missing anything in order to fully consider them for all the aid they have to package students with in this process. In terms of scholarships, seniors, this is something you can start on now. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to wait until your senior year to start looking for scholarships, but absolutely for any seniors tuning into this presentation, if you haven't started looking for scholarships, now is a great time to get started. If you can set aside about an hour a week to start applying for scholarships. That's a great habit to put into place. I always say in this process, start local. If you have not read one of your college career counselor's emails this semester, check your inbox first, because there's usually some messages that they want you to tune into. They may have mentioned a process for how they want you to request recommendations, either from themselves or from teachers. So start there. And parents, if you haven't heard from your college career counselor recently, your son or daughter probably has 20 or 30 messages that are unread in their inbox. So just check that inbox first. As you get started in this process, starting local is the best practice here, because local scholarships will get awarded sometimes at the high school level, and that's the competition that you have the best chances in. That the odds are the most in your favor at that point. The broader you draw that circle out, so from your high school to a county level, or from the county to the region within the state, then to the state, then broader than that at a national level, the higher up you go, numerically, the odds shrink in terms of your possibilities of getting scholarships. And I say that not to say to discourage anybody from looking at nationally competitive scholarships, but to say to not put all of your eggs in one basket in terms of the type of scholarships you're applying for. Every award that you think you're eligible for as a student, or for parents that you think your son or daughter is eligible for, I want you to have those scholarships on your list, and I want you to be applying for them. In terms of sites, these are all sites that I recommend using in this process. And when I'm meeting with students and families, I ask students to think about literally every way that they exist and walk through this world, and to put those details into these profiles. And one of the things I commonly ask when I'm in front of an audience is that if there are any naturally redheaded people in the room, or any left-handed people. It gets that specific for these sites. So literally, for the students listening, think about all of those factors. If you practice a particular faith, sometimes families get caught up in the idea that there are only scholarships based on race and ethnicity. Those are factors that some organizations will use in their scholarship process, but it's so much more varied beyond that. I want you to think about every way that you exist literally, and then put those factors into these profiles as you're building them, so the results that you get back are tailored specifically to the student at the individual level, and these scholarships feel relevant to them. You may be offered work study. At the federal level, work study is a program where the federal government is putting money in to help institutions cover these positions. I had, before my work with the college place, I worked at both UVA and Virginia Tech. That's what happens when you go to school in Charlottesville and fall in love with a Hokie. Sometimes love takes you strange places after graduation. And it's but the reason I mentioned that here is because one of the things that I took very seriously as a work study supervisor at both institutions was this idea that my students were not just my employees on staff. I cared about them graduating on time. So I wasn't just checking in with them about whether or not they were clocking in their hours appropriately, if they're handling the tasks that I was assigning to them. But we'd have conversations leading into midterms about how they were feeling, if they had the preparation that they thought they needed to do as well as they could academically on this test. We'd have conversations about what happened if they failed a midterm or an exam. That can be really debilitating, especially if a student is really used to achieving at a very high level academically. That first F in college can be world shattering. So we'd have conversations about all those things, including developing professional skills in the workplace. But that's one of the reasons I recommend federal work study to students who receive it as a part of the financial aid process. I think it's just an added benefit to the collegiate experience. Work study at the institutional level and institutional jobs may also be offered to help you pay for your cost of attendance. Benefit for federal work study is that it's looked at as financial aid dispersed in the year that it's used by the student to pay for their education. For institutional work study or institutional jobs that are offered, that taxable income may impact future year financial aid awards, depending on how much the student earns during that calendar year, whereas federal financial aid through federal work study would not. And then there are student loans that may be offered to students in this process as well. Subsidized loans are need-based, so it depends on the student aid index. There is a limit in terms of how much you can borrow through this fund. It varies by year, but going into your freshman year, as an example, between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, the maximum you can borrow from those two funds is $5,500, and you can borrow a maximum of, I want to say it's $2,500 your freshman year. It's 2,500 or 3,000 your freshman year for subsidized, and then about 2,000 from unsubsidized. The rates are set for the life of the loan. You can see here that they're a little bit lower than they were last year. These rates are reset essentially every year on or around July 1st. But for unsubsidized loans, it is non-need based, so it doesn't matter what your student aid index is. You can use unsubsidized loans to help you pay for your education, but then the interest accumulates from the time you borrow these funds as well. For any students who are listening, or for parents of students, if your son or daughter is in their senior year of high school now, by the time they get to graduate school, the Grad Plus loan won't be an option anymore. But I leave it on the screen to mention again as a reminder, tune in to what decisions are being made at the congressional level, because that will determine what funding is available each year in college. You do need to apply for financial aid every year that you're in school. For some schools, it may mean just submitting the FAFSA each year, but there may also be some additional forms that you have to fill out as well. You may be asked to take out a Parent Plus loan to help you pay for your education. Parents, if you're asked to do that, you do need to pass a credit check in order to get access to these funds. A biological or adoptive parent is needed to get access to this. And then parents, unlike your son or daughter, who has until 6 months after either they stop pursuing their credential, or they graduate, or they drop to less than half-time enrollment, for a Parent Plus loan, say that it's dispersed August 1st to help you pay for your son or daughter's education that fall, your first payment will be September 15th, October 1st. So it's typically 30 to 45 days after that loan is dispersed. The interest rate is a little bit higher. It is a fixed rate loan. But please, as you are discussing the possibilities and options for paying for an education, make sure that you can afford it. Sometimes I'll meet with families where they're talking about a Parent Plus loan, but the income and conversations make it feel like it's really a stretch. I understand as a parent, sometimes you want to do anything and everything you can for your children to help them find success. But as a family, have a conversation before you get to this point about what is a reasonable amount of money for anybody to borrow to pay for their education, because between public, so federal opportunities to borrow money and private sources, you can borrow almost endlessly in this process of paying for college. And I want everybody to go in with a goal in mind. If it's not borrowing any money, if it's not borrowing more than X amount of dollars, have that conversation before financial aid offers are made, so that way you know going in what this is going to look like for your family as you work through this process. This is what debt looks like at the national level. And in Virginia, we're not doing so good. We're getting close to $40,000. This is on average for the course of 4 years, whereas the national average is about $2,000 lower than where we're at in Virginia. And the other the other 5 states on the screen are where we have other college place locations in the U.S. But in general, this is why I mentioned having conversations as a family to see what is a reasonable amount of money to borrow as a family. Have that conversation now as you work through the college admissions process as a senior, before you get those financial aid offers back. Because for some students, your dream school may be absolutely amazing. It could be a great fit in terms of major, the type of research you want to do as an undergrad, the opportunities to study abroad, to network. But when that financial aid award letter comes, your dream school could turn into a little bit of a nightmare because of what they're asking you to borrow. So that's why I always encourage students and families to have that conversation about loans and what you want to borrow for your education before you get information back. And then decide accordingly what is the best fit institution from there. There are additional ways to pay through college through service, which is talking with a young lady earlier who was thinking about going into the military after graduation. One, because her father had served, but two, she knew that there were great benefits available through service, one of which could help her pay for college. And the conversation I always have with students that are going this route, one is to make sure that the opportunity truly aligns with what you want, and you're not just pursuing it for the money. Because regardless of the branch that you're going into, boot camp is meant to be difficult, and the process can be really grueling in terms of military service, both in terms of the time commitment that you have and the sacrifices our service members make in terms of time away from home, time away from family, especially if their unit is activated and deployed abroad. So when I'm meeting with students, I encourage them that those that are thinking about service from this perspective to explore all the opportunities that are there, to make sure you're talking with your recruiter about what those opportunities look like, what the time commitment and those sacrifices do look like, so you're well informed before you make that decision. It's not to ever discourage anybody from pursuing this route, but just for the young lady that I was mentioning, talking to earlier, through our conversation, come to find out, it felt like an ROTC program might be a better fit for her. That's an opportunity to get a scholarship through an ROTC program at the undergraduate level, but to still pursue her degree and then complete the service obligation on the back end after graduation, going into a military branch as an officer, instead of enlisting right out of high school. So please, I encourage everyone to explore these opportunities, and if it's a good fit for you, make sure you understand everything that goes into them as well. In terms of financial aid applications in Virginia, these are primarily the applications we'll be dealing with in the financial aid process. Every student in Virginia, regardless of their status, will be filling out either the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, or the VASA, the Virginia Alternative State Aid application, not both. And the VASA is not for every Virginian to fill out in this process. I'll touch more on this in a moment, but it's starting this process with one of these two forms. If you're only applying to schools in Virginia, if you're applying to schools outside of Virginia, even if you're using the VASA for schools inside of the Commonwealth, you may be filling out the FAFSA or other forms for schools outside of the state of Virginia if your search goes beyond our state's borders. You may be asked to submit the CSS profile. This is typically going to come from a private college or university, although there's a handful of public schools they'll ask for this form as well. And I advise students that if it takes you and your family 45 minutes to work through your FAFSA, give yourself twice the amount of time to work through a CSS profile. Just ask for a lot more asset-based questions, more than anything else. And then non-custodial parent information will come in on the profile for depending on the institution, where it wouldn't necessarily for the FAFSA or the VASA. And then last but not least, scholarship applications. Seniors, again, you have some agency in this process. You need to be applying for scholarships. I don't want anybody relying on any one college or university to figure out what it's going to cost you to pay for your education. You applying for scholarships is giving yourself agency in this process. So if you get $5,000 in outside scholarships, $10,000 in outside scholarships, whatever that figure is, that gives you some more control in this process and the ability to decide without all thinking about down to the last dollar if you can afford it. If you have some scholarship dollars that we pay for it, it makes this a lot less stressful of a decision to make on that end. In terms of which form you should fill out, this is driven by the student status. So as long as a student falls into one of the categories on the screen here, they are eligible to receive federal aid. So they should fill out the FAFSA and not worry about the VASA at all. And this is regardless of their parent status. So U.S. citizens, U.S. nationals, obviously could be considered for federal aid and receive it. Anybody that's here as a permanent resident, anybody that's been granted admitted as a refugee or granted asylum, as long as those statuses are not conditional, then they're eligible to receive federal aid. So they should work through the FAFSA and again, not worry about the VASA in this process. When you log on to studentaid.gov to start working through your FAFSA, this is what the screen looks like. Alyssa watched me last night for an in-person presentation, and I thought that federal student aid had taken away the accept the invitation portion here on the screen. But I was working with some students to fill out their FAFSAs earlier this morning, and this is what the screen looks like. So you'll see all these different options when you log in to work through the form. You can start a new form for 26-27 as a senior. If a student has already started a form, you can save your progress as you go along, so you don't have to sit down and do this all at one time. If you're in a position to do so, that's great. But if you have to stop and start, you have the option to save your progress along the way and log back in. And then for parents, when your student adds you as a contributor, you can accept an invitation. One of the things I will say is that so far we are seeing an issue when parents are starting the FAFSA for their son or daughter. Some families are having a hard time getting the student linked to that FAFSA form that the parent has started on their behalf. If you run into that scenario, the easiest solution, even though it means a little bit more work, is just deleting the form that the parent started and having the student start the FAFSA. So this is advice that I have stuck with over the last few years. I advise the student to start the FAFSA form, invite the parent in, have the parent or parents complete their portion, and then submit from there. Everybody will need what's called a federal student aid ID. You may also see language online referring to this as a studentaid.gov account. There were some, in addition to the structural changes that Congress made to some of the funds going into this form, they're changing some of the language as it comes to the financial aid process. And this is one of those areas where you'll see FSA ID and studentaid.gov, depending on what site you're reading, they mean the same thing. What is the account that you're using to access the FAFSA form, to input information, to sign the FAFSA, to sign the master promissory note for loans you may be using in this process? As you're setting up this ID, as long as your social security card doesn't say for work authorization only, you'll use your social security number and your name as it appears on your social security card to set this account up. If your card does say for work authorization only, and that was issued when you were a conditional entrant, but now you've been granted asylum or you've been granted permanent residency, and your card just hasn't been updated since that point, you could use that number at that point, because your status is no longer conditional to create an FSA ID. For anyone without a social security number, you would check off the box saying you don't have one. And then there's an identity-based question that will, or 4 to 7 that will pop up at the end of your ID creation for those without social security numbers. But you'll use this to access this form again, and to sign master promissory notes for student loans. You will want to give yourself multiple ways to get access to this information. So federal student aid will ask you to add in an email or a phone number or answer challenge questions or download an app. I encourage you on the front end to do at least all 3 of the first options: email address, phone number, and answer the challenge questions. Right now in senior year, when you're working through the FAFSA for the first time, you're going to be logging into your studentaid.gov account, whether you're a student or a parent, to make sure that everything's been submitted, everything looks correct, you're not missing anything. You'll be using this data over and over again. Next year, by the time you get to the beginning of freshman year, you may have changed phone numbers. You may have lost access to an email address. So now, because you have multiple ways set up to get access to the information, you can recover your account very easily. But say 10 years from now, you forget all of the answers to your challenge questions, but you have the same phone number. That gives you the opportunity to log back in without resetting everything or dragging this process out. So give yourself multiple ways to get access to this account year over year. I always encourage students and families to sit down together to fill out the FAFSA. I know that's not always a possibility, but when the student starts to form, this is all the information they see. They see a lot more than what parents will see, and I'll show that in a moment. But they'll start with special or unusual circumstances, talk about their demographics, their background, where they live, who do they live with. Students will then be asked about their financial situation. For seniors now, if you worked in 2024, that is a tax year that will be used in this part of the financial aid process. So you'll be asked to provide approval and consent for your information to be shared from the IRS. You can decline to provide that consent, but if you do, the student will only be considered for unsubsidized loans. That's if a student contributor declines to provide approval and consent, or if a parent contributor declines to provide that consent. I've been asked over the last few years by parents, especially those who may be worried about sharing information with the federal government, about why they need to approve and consent. One, to make sure that any aid at the federal level your son or daughter is eligible for, that they're receiving it. But two, if you're going through the process of submitting the FAFSA, the data is going to be checked with what's on file with the IRS on the back end. So eliminate the need for that reference point on the back end. Make sure your son or daughter gets all the aid they're eligible for, approve and consent on the front end. The information's encrypted, so you nor your son or daughter will actually see this information as it's input into the FAFSA. It's encrypted, transmitted from the IRS, and then when financial aid offices receive it, they'll download what's called an ISER, and they'll see the unlocked information at that point. From there, students can list up to 20 colleges. Once their FAFSA has been processed, if their college list is larger than 20 schools, they can go in and delete school codes and add in additional ones that they need to send this information to. But then they'll be asked to list their parent and their email address. The last few years, students needed to have their parent's social security number and birth date. One of the fun things I always encourage parents to do is for you to ask your kid when you were born and ask them for the month, the day, and the year. It always surprises parents when their kids have no idea when they were born. That does happen. And it's interesting to see parents' reactions when their kid may be off by a decade or two as far as the year that they were born in. So have that fun moment in this process that can otherwise feel really stressful. But share that, and then the student will be asked to sign their FAFSA at that point. And from there, when a parent contributor logs in, this is all you see. So compared to the previous screen and all the details that I just mentioned, parents, you'll add in some demographic information. You will be asked to approve and consent for your information to be transmitted from the IRS. You'll enter in some basic questions about assets from there, depending on your family's finances, and then you'll be asked to sign and submit. And that's it. It is possible for a parent to get through their portion in 5 minutes. And for some parents, especially if you have older children that have been through college, or if you think back to your process of working through the financial aid process when you went to college yourself, if you went, it can feel really unnerving. Some parents have reached out to me after they've completed their portion of their FAFSA saying, Jason, I think I messed up. I got through this way too quickly. I'm sure I missed something. If that happens, take a deep breath. I'm sure everything's okay. But even if you did miss something, once everything's been processed, we can log in, we can double check just to make sure everything looks correct. If you're approving and consenting for your information to be transmitted directly, it really can take as little as 5 minutes for a parent to work through their form. If parents are married filing jointly, only one parent contributor will be identified as needing to contribute to this form. If parents are married filing separately for whatever reason, both parents will be identified as contributors. If the biological or adoptive parents have fallen out of love since they gave birth to their child, then one will be identified possibly as a contributor. It's based on who's provided the most financial support in the last 12 months. And from there, if a parent who's identified has remarried, the step parent's income will be included as a part of this process as well. If you're not sure who to list, ask along the way for clarity. It doesn't matter what court decisions were made once separation and or divorce happened. It is literally left up to the student who's filling out the FAFSA at that point to determine which parent they're listing. You are directed if parents say that they split everything 50-50 right down the middle in terms of support. Federal student aid will direct the student to list the parent with a higher income and or assets. But there's no way for federal student aid to check that. So it is literally up to the student at that point as far as who they're listing as their parent contributor. That parent will report information, and as it shows on the screen, if a step parent has entered into the equation and that parent has remarried, their income would be included as well. Anybody on this screen in front of us is not a financial aid parent. Is not a parent contributor for this process. The only exception would be is if any of these individuals has adopted the student, then they would be the financial aid parent. Virginia has some interesting language around guardianship. If legal guardianship has been awarded, then in most cases, the student would be independent. There are some scenarios where a parent contributor at that point or a guardian may be identified, but usually the student will still be independent. The exception would be is if custody was granted, and during the termination of legal guardianship, and in that scenario, the student would go back to their biological or adopted parents to get information for the FAFSA, not their custodial guardian at this point. The Virginia Alternative State Application is the form that I mentioned earlier. That's for any student who is ineligible to receive federal aid, who may qualify for tuition equity in Virginia. They could use this form to get access to state aid they're eligible for and potentially institutional aid. It opens this site. I know this page says around the same time as the FAFSA, but the 26-27 VASA is not quite open yet. I imagine it should open up around the beginning of November, but I haven't heard anything specifically on that end. Again, it is for any student who is ineligible to receive federal aid, but they would get a student aid index similar to what the FAFSA will produce. No federal aid will be awarded. State aid will be awarded based on their eligibility. We do need 2 years of Virginia state tax information. Sometimes the person reporting this information didn't earn enough to have to file taxes. So just as long as you have that tax information, that's what you need. In addition to the student spending at least 2 years in a Virginia high school and graduating from Virginia high school to use the VASA at that point. But again, any U.S. citizen, permanent resident, student in this process, you'll forget that the VASA exists. You'll fill out the FAFSA to get access to federal, state, and institutional aid that you're eligible for. Again, these are the forms that are available in Virginia. These are some of the primary grant awards that you'll see in the Commonwealth. And I'll quickly go to the next screen because these offer more details about these programs. So some of them are need-based. Some of them are based on the type of institution that you're enrolling in. Chev.edu has more information about all the state grants that are available in the Commonwealth. But every grant, as you can see on the screen, has different requirements that need to be met in order to receive these funds. Pushing ahead a little bit because I know I'm getting closer to my time for this presentation, but if you're asked to submit the CSS profile, again, this is a form that's typically asked for by private colleges, some scholarship foundations. It is the one thing that may cost money in terms of applying for financial aid. It is a product of the College Boards, the same people that have brought us the PSAT, SAT, AP courses and exams. This is another one of their products to help with the college admissions financial aid process. So they may charge a fee to the student to submit this form. There are a few waivers available, but it's up to the college university that is asking for the profile to accept that waiver. And then for the profile, non-custodial parent information is required for some institutions where it's not even considered for the FAFSA or the VASA. These are the colleges as of the 25-26 academic year that are requesting the profile in Virginia. I don't think anybody else would be added on to this academic year. So coming up 26-27, but I'll check again over the summer. And I always encourage students and families as you're working through this process, if you haven't reached senior year yet, just make sure you check back senior year just to make sure that nothing has changed about what financial aid is asking for if you're preparing early with the forms you need to submit in this process. Because again, seniors, you've got some agency and control in this process. You can look for scholarships. I want you to start local. Think about where you or your parents work. Are there scholarships available as a part of educational benefits through employers? Think locally. Pay attention for those that are not in their senior year yet, as far as what seniors in your high school are receiving, especially if they're local scholarships. Make sure you have those scholarships on your list to apply for your senior year. Some deadlines are early. They may already be passing at this point in your senior year. So please, the earlier you get started in this process of applying for scholarships, the better, because there's over $8 billion in private funding that's available. Over 100 million goes unawarded every year because students don't apply for it. If a scholarship is $100, it is worth your time to apply for it if it's something applicable to you. Those are usually the scholarship awards that go unawarded because students don't feel like it's worth their time. A scholarship for $100, $250, $500, it might take you 30 minutes to apply for. That is absolutely worth your time, especially if you win it as an awardee. It is easy, especially around this time of senior year, to get discouraged if you're not receiving any information back about scholarships, or if you're applying every month for no essay scholarships that are coming up, to get discouraged. Please hang in there. If you get discouraged and opt out of applying for scholarships, you won't receive anything. You need to keep focused on what your goal is. Don't set an upper limit for yourself. If you get $25,000 in private scholarships, that's amazing. Go for 50. If you've got 50, go for 100. There's no limit in this process. So you can always defer for future years of education to help you pay for school. Stay organized. Ask your parents for support. And in terms of timelines, you're already tuning in to presentations like this. So if you're in your senior year, congratulations. But it's about to get really stressful. So keep yourself organized. Talk to your parents if you're a student tuning in about what your goals are in this process. Keep this process as manageable for yourself and your family as possible. Continue looking for scholarships. Check your email on a regular basis in case you miss anything. I encourage everyone to attend college fairs. I was just at one last night, Unity Read for Prince William County. So if your high school or an area high school is hosting a college fair, please go if you're able to do so. For seniors, I hope your college lists are finalized at this point. And if not, they will be very soon, because especially if you're applying early decision, early action, you may have only a few weeks left until November 1st hits and those deadlines start in this process. You keep up with those application deadlines, both for admissions and financial aid, and make sure you work through the process of applying for college completely. Have discussions as families as far as what makes sense for you all in this process. Ask questions along the way. I always like to tell students and families there's no such thing as a dumb question in this process. Even if it's a question that I've gotten 1,000 times already in my work, I want you to have the answer you need to make a well-informed decision about what comes next for either you as a student or for parents for your child at the end of senior year. So have those discussions. If you need additional resources, start with your college career counselor. I've worked with all of them in Prince William County schools, and they're all great and care a lot about doing a great job for the students they serve and the families they work with. I'm here as a resource at the College Place. If you're using tools like Big Future through the College Board, that's another great way to work your way through this process. If you have questions or get stuck on the FAFSA, you can always call Federal Student Aid. And then last but not least, this is my contact information. So if you ever have any questions or want to reach out, please email me, call me. Students usually are more comfortable texting. And as I mentioned earlier, if you sign up and respond to my messages that I send out between now and December 1st, I'll be entering you into a scholarship drawing that I'll do sometime in December. That's it for my presentation. I'll leave the screen up, but are there any questions I can answer?
Jason, we asked for questions in advance,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
we
yeah, that's right.
provided you with the list. Yep. Mhm.
I feel like I answered most of them. But if anything did come up where either the answer I didn't give was not enough, or if parents want to ask additional questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email as well.
I can also add that every high school will be offering FAFSA hands-on help sessions. And so we encourage you to reach out to your college and career counselor at your high school if you'd like to know of that date and if there's any registration requirements. And that would really only be just so that they know, have a head count on who is coming. And they like to give you some heads up on some things to prepare for. Example, like completing your FSA ID prior to coming, and what to bring with you. So definitely reach out to your college and career counselor to get that information on the hands-on help sessions at your school.
So thank you, everyone. We really do appreciate you coming on. I will be placing the survey link in the chat. Please take a few minutes to fill that out and just let us know how we're doing and what you want to see in the future. As a reminder, I will be sending out today's video presentation as well as the recording so that you have it as a resource. And so you'll have Mr. Puryear's contact information if you have any additional questions or you would like to reach out to him. So thank you everyone so much. We really do appreciate you joining us tonight, and we hope everyone has a wonderful evening.